All right, dimensional analysis. You may or may not have used dimensional analysis before, but we're going to learn how to use it today. Some of these problems you could probably do in your head, but I really want you to practice using dimensional analysis. We will need it later when we get to stoichiometry, and you have to show your work. So you want to get into a habit of setting this up properly. So this is just an intro, but dimensional analysis is a fancy word for converting units. In order to convert units, we will be using conversion factors. We will be using equivalents as our conversion factors. Okay, so let's start off by talking about what an equivalent is. It's something that equals something else. So when we talk about equivalents, 1 equals 1. That's an equivalent. 5 equals 5. That's an equivalent. Okay? We are going to take our equivalents and turn them into what we call conversion factors, and they're going to be in fraction form. Okay? So 1 equals 1 as a conversion factor would be 1 over 1. 5 equals 5 as a conversion factor would be 5 over 5. So if you multiply anything by these conversion factors, if you multiply something, say we multiply 1 over 1 by 2, you're essentially multiplying by 1, so you get 2. If you multiply anything by 5 over 5, again, you're going to get 2. Because when you have equal things that are equal in fraction form, that is 1. Okay, so let's talk about an equivalent that isn't so simplistic. Let's talk about 1 dozen roses. What does 1 dozen roses equal? Well, you should be thinking 12 roses equals 1 dozen. Okay, so we can take this equivalent and turn it into a conversion factor. We can say 1 dozen roses over 12 roses. Okay, but that's not the only way we could write this. We could put 12 roses over 1 dozen roses. Okay, so there's 2 ways to write that particular equivalent. Now, which one would you use? Well, it depends on what the question is and what you're trying to convert from and to. So say, I want to know how many dozen, no, let's do, roses are in 3.5 dozen. Okay, so it gives us 3.5 dozen. Whatever's given is what you're going to start with. So 3.5 dozen. And I always teach to set this up in what we call a T-chart. Okay, so we're going to put our conversion factor in this T-chart. Okay, and whatever unit we start with, in this case dozen, is what's going to go down here on the bottom. The other unit's going to go on top right there. So since we're starting with dozen, we want dozen to go down here on the bottom. So which one of the conversion factors, this one or this one, has dozen on the bottom? It's this one. Okay? So we're going to put 12 roses over 1 dozen roses. Okay, since we've got this set up like this, we're going to multiply everything on top and divide by everything on the bottom. So we'll do, you'll just put it into your calculator, but let's see, we got 3.5 times 12 equals 42, and then divided by 1, because that's on the bottom. You don't necessarily have to put the 1 in the calculator because it's going to be the same, but it will be 42. Since we're dividing by dozen, that cancels that unit out, and our unit now is just roses. Okay, so 3.5 dozen, dozen roses equals 42 roses. Okay, that's how you use dimensional analysis. Okay, so if we did it a different way, if we said how many dozen roses if we have okay, so how many dozen roses do we have if we have 231 roses? So we're starting with 231 roses. Set up our T-chart. This time we're starting with roses, so we want roses on the bottom. So we're going to use 1 dozen over 12 roses. That's so the roses cancel out, and our answer will be in dozen. Okay, so this time we're doing 231 divided by 12. So 231 divided by 12 equals 19.25. Okay, and when doing dimensional analysis, whatever is given, in this case it's the 231, okay, that's given, that's 3 sig figs. So we want our answer in 3 sig figs. So we're going to round that 2 to a 3. So this would be 19.3 dozen. Okay. Remember, when you multiply and divide, it's the least number of sig figs. In this case, it was 3.5. That's 2 sig figs, so our answer is in 2 sig figs. Okay. You always tend to use what's given in the problem, not necessarily the conversion factor, because that's not, you don't use conversion factors as sig figs. If you are given 2 numbers in the problem, then you would use both of those numbers to figure out how many sig figs your answer should be in. Okay, so that's just a little intro to dimensional analysis. And I have a dimensional analysis worksheet on Schoology, or I have emailed it to you to practice and try to work through. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me.